But this salvia right here is to the point that it's so tall that it's flopping over. And this is when I go in and just take it down about halfway. I try to leave a few blooms for the pollinators. So you see how it's kind of hollowed out right there? That's because it's just getting top heavy, and with normal rains and stuff, it's just going to start to fall down like that. So I'm going to start around this back edge and get these. And I trim the edge ones, I trim almost all the way to the ground because they don't need to be growing in that space as much. Better off being shorter than the center of the plant, so the whole plant can be more symmetrical and get sunlight distributed evenly. If you always just cut straight across when you're doing these mid-season cuts, then all the new growth comes back at the same time, and it can actually, shade itself out in certain areas and not be as appealing. But by strategically considering how high you're cutting certain branches, that helps encourage the new growth to form at certain heights that doesn't block sunlight. So that's the goal here. So all of these that are falling to the back along the edge, I'm taking all the way down within a couple inches of the ground. So it's really important when doing this to make sure you have a weed management plan, because I'm introducing sunlight to ground that hasn't had sunlight, and any dormant seeds here are going to want to come up. So if you don't have weed management in place when you're doing something like this, then you could at least put some mulch down to help minimize the weeds that are just there waiting to pop up. So these are the blooms that I'm going to leave right next to the arbor. I'm leaving these. Right here is a butterfly bush blending with these cosmos, which is fine to a certain extent. What I've got to do here is there's one that's leaning all the way forward that I'm going to go ahead and cut halfway back so it can make more growth here. And then I'm also going to clear out a couple cosmos that are growing a little bit too close that I know are inhibiting sunlight to the point it will not bloom in this area. And I'd really I've got cosmos throughout the entire garden, and I'd rather this butterfly bush be able to put out and do its thing in this area than let the cosmos keep growing. So I'm pulling up the cosmos that are all within the branches of this butterfly bush. Cosmos are just obstructing the sun just enough to prevent the blooms from happening. So I could cut them in half, but they grow a little faster than the butterfly bush, so there's the potential they'll come and fill in again before the butterfly bush can set blooms. So that's why I'm just going ahead and removing them. And I'm also going to drop a bag of mulch right there as soon as things dry out a little bit, just to make sure I didn't stir up any seed bank, because if I don't put something there, then something else could grow up even faster than the cosmos that would cause other problems. So this is already a problematic area has a lot of weed activity. So I definitely don't want to contribute any more to that than's already here. That's why I'm trying to get some cone flowers established and let this butterfly bush kind of have center stage. Okay, I'm making some pollinators pretty angry, because once you understand your growing conditions, you'll be able to notice when you're doing things that may change those growing conditions. Because if you're putting plants in an area according to their growing conditions, and then a year later you go introduce a shrub that's 10 feet away, you could be altering an entire section of your garden by creating a shaded area that used to be sun, and you have already installed full sun plants. Then a year later, when that plant's not performing correctly, you're gonna wonder why and start worrying about that, whatever's going on with that plant, instead of thinking what changed and what caused that plant to decline. So it's not about just seeing a plant that you like, getting it and putting it where you think it's going to look best. You're looking for plants you like I want a white flower, and then finding white flowers, and then going, I want white flowers here, and then getting any white flower you see that you like and planting it where you want to see white flowers. That's guesswork. You can just hope it works out. It may or may not work, but you're going to waste a lot of time and money usually doing it that way. The best thing to do is shop for the spot. You need to be able to understand before you go shopping for plants. Where are these plants going and what your conditions are? And then you shop for the plant that wants that. So it's more about what plant wants you and less about what plant you want. So as I'm cutting back these cosmos, I'm seeing there's so many weeds in here that I just have to tackle. I can't leave them unmanaged. So I'm going to need to pull up the ones that are sprouted, because otherwise, now that they're going to get sunlight, they're going to take off and seed. And that's the last thing I want to do is introduce more weed seeds. So understanding the life cycle of these weeds is the key to staying ahead of them, because you don't really want to be chasing weed problems after they're a problem. The key to weed management is preventing them and then being able to notice and act on conditions that could easily get out of hand or prevent them altogether. And that sunlight has a lot to do with that, especially when you're cleaning up areas like this to help other plants fill in. You have to realize, even though I'm trying to help this butterfly bush fill in, I'm also creating conditions that could help the weeds fill in. I have to make sure and take whatever steps to give the butterfly bush an advantage while making sure the weeds don't take advantage of those conditions as well, because they are ready to go. They're all just sprouted down here waiting for some sun. Pre-emergent and mulch. That's what's going to happen right here. So there's some coneflowers I see coming up right here. So that's why I'm taking these cosmos back a little bit further than I originally planned, because I didn't know there was some baby coneflowers in here, and I definitely would like them to have the advantage. So I am trimming all the cosmos around those and cutting back what I see. So by getting your weeds before they seed, you're managing your seed bank and making sure that you don't contribute to that seed bank. You want to reduce the inventory of your seed bank every year as much as possible. And the key to doing that is just staying on top of weeds and getting rid of them before they have a chance to seed. It's much easier said than done, but it can work. And it goes a long way in upcoming years if you can stick to that routine and strategy over time. And then the other best thing to keeping that seed bank in check is making sure that you do not disturb the surface of the soil. And if you do, take steps to counteract whatever you did, because when you disturb the surface of the soil, you have just introduced those seeds that were dormant to sunlight, effectively planting them and encouraging them to come up and sprout. So weed management is all about keeping your seed bank in check, and that's a couple key things about long-term weed care strategies. Now, around this rose, there's too much going on. Here's a weed that's already seeded, so I need to be extra careful with that one. When you're pulling weeds that already have a seed on them, be careful not to shake those seeds loose, because so many people do that. They don't realize it. But if you happen to see a weed and you're weeding your garden and you see ones with seeds on them, those should be handled differently than all the other weeds, because those are the ones that you're going to be falling off and being planted in your garden. Mother Nature is very good at her job, and distributing seeds naturally is just one of those things that you want to prevent as much as possible, especially on weeds. Now, there's some cosmos growing around this rose bush. I'm clearing those out too. I don't even know how this rose was able to make a flower. It must have gotten overlooked earlier in the year, but you can see that this is clearly an unhappy bush, but there's a very happy bluebonnet right next to it. All of this is really robbing the tree of energy, and it's robbing these lower plants of sunlight. So I'm going to remove these. This one's gonna have to go. Okay, so stepping back, just being able to see through both of those canopies, I know that I've cleaned up the top part, and then down here, I've really cleared out a lot of the cosmos and weeds. So I need to apply a treatment and mulch right around this area where I exposed all this dirt to sunlight. Otherwise, within a week when I come back, there will be weeds sprouting all throughout there that will just overtake the area even more than the cosmos and weeds were to begin with. So that's the next step now. And after I get all the mulch and treatment done, I may cut back more of those cosmos around it. We'll see. Whenever I am doing pre-emergent treatment, I always have my blower in hand because it's just not worth the risk of hoping there's none on leaves, because it will take out a plant. These granulars, once they get wet, they stick to the leaves of plants and can cause a lot of damage and death. So it's always best just to have the blower with you. I walk around, and even if I don't see any stuck, I blow everywhere that I sprinkle. Because I've already got the treatment down, but it has to be a certain type of mulch to work in between stepping stones. And I think I have a couple bags over here. Because the finer shred mulch is going to fill in between those gaps and stay there far better than anything chunky. The shred, to me, sometimes is more important than the type, because the shred determines if it's going to stay there to do its job. So being able to know that, because the worst mulch is the chipped mulch. I've never found a place where chipped mulch is a good idea. Once I get all of this blown in around all this new mulch area, then I will water everything in and lock in the mulch. So it's been about 1 year since this little pathway was completely overtaken with weeds, and I had to basically start over. Since then, I have had a mulch shed on site that I can, it really helps me stay on top of the section. And that's another thing that you have to consider. As your garden matures, the demands mature right along with them. The plants require a different level of care when they're in their mature size than when they're babies. Yeah, for example, when I first started taking care of this garden about 4 years ago, I could cover 2,000 square feet in a visit and have things kept up and managed, and the weeds were very easy to manage and maintain at that point in time. However, fast forward to now, which is 3.5, 4 years later, all these plants are at their mature size or reaching their mature size. And then combined with the fact a lot of it's overplanted, I can only cover maybe 300 to 500 square feet in a visit. Same number of hours, but the work is much more laborsome and strategic during this stage of a garden than it is at the beginning. So that's kind of something you have to keep in mind, is a lot of people go out and they buy plants and they fill up the space with the way that it looks, and they're very happy with it the first year. After a year 3 or 4, it becomes out of control, and they kind of lose sight of what their goal was, because some plant that they put there needed care that they didn't notice or realize that was going to cause problems for other plants, and it just kind of turns into a jungle at that point in time. And in this situation, I saw it happening faster than I could keep up with it. Every visit basically turned into a rescue mission of trying to just manage the areas that were threats rather than the plants. I was just trying to reduce the threats rather than remove or prevent them, because the scale of this garden just got too out of control. So you could see how, 3 years ago, I may have had 2 or 3 weeks to get to some branches that were growing out of place. At this stage, I don't have 2 or 3 weeks with each plant. When a plant starts getting out of place, I have pretty much, maybe a week and a half to get to it before it's already creating problems for another plant. Water will evaporate at a much faster rate if the mulch is not locked in place. So you always want to water in your mulch, call it what you want, but I call it locking in, and it basically closes all the air pockets from the mulch resting on top of itself, so it can actually do its job of suppressing weeds and helping retain moisture in the soil. If you just lay your mulch down, rake it in place, and leave, then you've essentially just created conditions for your soil to dry out quicker, and you will still have sunlight getting to weeds that you're trying to suppress with the mulch. The point of mulch is to keep the ground cooler in the summer, warmer in the winter, and it can't do that effectively or efficiently if there's a bunch of holes in it. You're basically creating a blanket. The blanket is not one solid piece until it's locked in. So that's why it's important to water in your mulch. Now, since I put down pre-emergent as I'm watering the mulch, it's also activating the pre-emergent. So that's why I wait till the very end to activate that. It gets activated when the mulch is locked in. And this butterfly bush right here that I'm watering, it's getting a huge advantage compared to what it had whenever I got here today. So the only way to keep that in check is understanding what job each plant you put in your garden is going to have, and then you want to give it as many advantages as possible to perform that job. And when all the plants are in their place to perform the job that you got them to do, that will be a successful garden.